My opponent, Governor Gavin Newsom. Come on. Let's be gracious. Let's be gracious in defeat.
That was conservative candidate Larry Elder, who, despite the fact was planning on claiming that there was widespread voter fraud if he lost, actually conceded and did so pretty gracefully last night. Now, this was in regard to the recall election involving the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. There was a petition to recall him. There were enough signatures to make it happen. And it turns out that he was able to garner enough no votes toward the recall to maintain his position as governor of California. Now, Larry Elder's supporters clearly needed to take a little trip to the copium den. They were really struggling with the news. They didn't want to accept it. But despite the political differences I have with Larry Elder, I do commend him for conceding and not trying to pull what Donald Trump did in the 2020 presidential election. Now, there are some things to learn about regarding the recall race, some pretty surprising results actually, because there were various polls that indicated that Newsom was in trouble. But apparently his ground game was strong. Democrats turned up, they turned in their mail-in ballots, and some of the fraud allegations, unfounded fraud allegations involving mail-in ballots coming from Republicans is actually really hurting them. So we'll get to those details in just a second. But first, here are the results of the election as of now. More ballots are coming in, more ballots are being counted, I should say. But as of now, with about 2/3 of the expected vote in, 64% of California voters had chosen to keep Newsom around for the end of his first term. Now keep in mind, he's facing a re-election campaign in 2022. So, there will be an opportunity to challenge him from the left should there be a strong progressive candidate. Now that margin is likely to shrink at least a little bit in the coming days as more votes are counted. That's the way it works, right? But clearly he has enough of a lead to clinch this win. He is going to maintain his position. Now Newsom had actually improved on his share in several important places. 53% of Orange County voters voted against the recall, higher than the 50.1% who backed Newsom there in 2018. Now, for anyone who might not know about Orange County, it is usually thought of as a more conservative part of California. And historically, it's been a far more conservative part of California. That's changing a little bit, but I have to be honest, even I was surprised that 53% of voters in Orange County voted against the recall. And I don't think that's necessarily a way of validating Gavin Newsom. The other candidates were just horrendous. They were awful. I had some hope that there might be a progressive alternative, and there wasn't. So it might just be an attempt to prevent a more unstable nonsense in the state. So the GOP also is now worried that some of the claims of voter fraud, especially when it comes to mail-in ballots coming from the likes of Donald Trump, is actually harming the Republican Party. So Republicans are especially worried about the damage Trump is doing to mail-in ballot habits of base Republican voters, habits that GOP strategists have spent years building up. Registered Democrats made a disproportionately high share of ballots returned by mail, while many Republicans appear to have waited for election day to vote if they voted at all. So look, the mail-in ballot, which is how I voted in this recall election, I voted no, was incredibly easy, right? I mean, you get it at home, you just fill it out, send it back. You don't have to deal with any type of obstacle. There are no issues. But if you are a Republican voter and you've been consuming anti-mail-in ballot messaging, which claims that it's not a valid way of voting, it's not a credible way of voting, there's gonna be an issue with voting that way, well then you're less likely to vote by mail. And then once election day comes along, you might find some obstacles in the way of casting your ballot. So now the GOP is really concerned about the damage that Donald Trump is doing. And to be sure, Trump was already preemptively, before a single ballot had been counted, claiming that the election was rigged. Okay, so it didn't end up helping the Republican Party. It didn't end up helping Larry Elder. And so we'll see if they actually learn any lessons from that. Now, Newsom's actions during the pandemic were the primary reason why this recall election was desired by right-wingers mostly, right? So there were business closures. For me personally, I think that he handled COVID far better than Republican governors in this country have handled COVID. I had issues with Gavin Newsom for a whole host of other things, including his unwillingness to shelter the homeless, provide permanent housing for them. I have issues with the fact that he decided to bail out PG&E, a private utility company that has sparked wildfires in the state. So those issues, though, did not go into the decision making by right-wing voters. They were upset at Gavin Newsom and some of these business closures. However, recall supporters who collected more than 2.1 million signatures did so on the strength of voter frustration at school closings, economic stagnation, and the early wave of COVID-19 cases that disproportionately hit low-income and minority communities. But he actually did manage to kind of turn things around, because his messaging went from closures and mask mandates to let's get people vaccinated. And he's done a decent job with that. So by the winter and spring of 2021, Newsom's approach to combating the virus had changed from encouraging people to stay at home to encouraging people to get a shot. And while some states have experienced challenges with vaccine hesitancy, California is not one of them. 83% of those over the age of 18 have received at least one shot. So that's certainly some good news. Now let's get to some of the reporting on this that certainly rubbed me the wrong way, okay? Because Gavin Newsom's campaign said something that I think is accurate yesterday. When it was clear that he was going to remain in office, he was asked whether they plan on celebrating. And he's like, no, I mean, there's really nothing to celebrate. This is a recall election. This is not a good look, right? And I think that's right. Unfortunately, the rabid conservatives in this state kind of controlled all of the media coverage on this issue. And what it did is it managed to drown out the concerns that progressives do in fact have in this state. Those concerns are valid, and Gavin Newsom needs to address them, okay? Now, did progressives lead the charge in this recall election? No, they didn't, the right wing did. So it's understandable why the right wing dominated the narrative on this recall. But Gavin Newsom is far, far from perfect in regard to how he's handled his job in California. Nonetheless, you have Thad Kozer. He is the chair of the poli-sci department at UC San Diego. He claims that Gavin Newsom still has Washington, D.C. in his gaze, and this recall, rather than tripping up his national ambitions, has elevated his visibility across the country. He's not doing a great job in California. The thing that saved him was that everyone else running against him in the recall was insane or not in any way suited for the position, right? So really, voting against the recall was an effort at damage control, right? It was strategic voting to prevent someone unhinged from taking his place. But let's be honest, he's not handling some of the big issues in the state right now, including the homeless crisis, including the wildfires, including climate change, which he claims to be some sort of warrior on, while he's simultaneously signing permits for more drilling, which of course is contributing to the climate disaster that we're experiencing in this planet. I was about to say this country. We are experiencing extreme weather events in this country, but really climate change, as we know, has had a far larger impact on poorer countries. And Gavin Newsom pretending to care about climate change while he's signing those fracking and drilling permits is ridiculous. Now, here's an excerpt from the Hill's reporting on this. Newsom's win was significant enough that he didn't just claim the right to finish his first term, he virtually guaranteed he will win a second term next year. I mean, that's certainly not hard news reporting. That's definitely opinion that's sprinkled into what's supposed to be a straight news report. But nonetheless, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. I wouldn't want Gavin Newsom to be too confident about what his chances are for a second term. I mean, if he really wants a second term, maybe he needs to focus on the issues that voters actually do genuinely care about. And I'm not just talking about, right wingers and the made up worries that they have. I'm specifically talking about the real economic concerns that people have in the state of California. They are worried about what we're seeing all across the state right now with homeless encampments, people living in squalor, people dying on the streets. That is a problem that he needs to address, in addition to these private utility companies and how incredibly irresponsible they've been in their failure to update their equipment to avoid sparking the massive wildfires that the state has experienced in recent years. So to make it seem like Gavin Newsom's got it in the bag and he's gonna have a second term, we'll see about that. But I'm really hoping that progressives are fighting hard and working hard to have an alternative to Newsom when he runs for re-election, because I would like an alternative to Newsom. He is not perfect, far from it, and unless he's willing to address the issues that I mentioned, I'm not really interested in seeing him have a second term, just keeping it real.